Hi everyone, welcome. This is an amazing turnout. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. And thank you for valuing the experience of listening to an artist's voice enough to choose to spend your evening here with us. You definitely picked a good night to come out, so thank you so much. I'm Denise Fanning, and I am the Arts and Exhibitions Coordinator here in Park Library. Thank you so much to Park Library for hosting and supporting the arts programming here, and to Dean Kathy Irwin for trusting my vision and supporting this series and this all the artist programming here and all the Artist Talk series. She has been an amazing support system behind the scenes every step of the way, and I think I saw Dean Roth is here somewhere. There he is, documenting. Thank you for being here. Dean Rothis is the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences, and he is a fierce supporter of our events and many, many events here on campus, and there aren't many deans like him out in the world, so we're really grateful for that support, and also to Paige, his wife, who's also here. Thank you so much. Couple quick announcements. First, if you're not already following the Baber Room Gallery on Instagram, please take out your phones, and if you have Wi-Fi service, which you may not, try to follow the Baber Room Gallery. Our handle is just Baber Room Gallery _CMU, and you can keep up with all the exhibitions programming and all the Artist Talk information. And you can also follow our artist, Scott Hocking Detroit. If you can't do it now, do it after. And then if you have your phone out, please silence it for the duration of the event. If you don't have your phone out, take it out and silence it if you have it, please. Also, a heads up for our next speaker event, which will be November 15th. That's artist Lakeela Brown. She is a wonderful Brooklyn-based artist who is from Detroit and is currently receiving a lot of accolades and attention in the art world, and she makes really beautiful sculptures that feature elements of Black American adornment and ethnobotany as symbols of cultural resilience. So please come back for that. Her show opens November 13th. And the talk is the 15th. And lastly, we'll have a question and answer session at the end of the talk tonight. So if you have questions, save them up and we'll shoot them at Scott after. We'll also have a meet and greet in the gallery following the lecture. So if you're up for it, head on down to the gallery, check out the show. If you haven't seen the show especially, please come down and check it out. And you can say hi to Scott, grab a brownie, some coffee, some lemonade. Okay, with that, I think we're done with announcements, so here we go. I am super thrilled to get to share tonight's guest with you. We are so lucky to have tonight's artist, Scott Hocking, bring his work and vision here to share with the Central Michigan community. When I first started in my role here at CMU, the position I filled had been vacant for several months, and there were no more exhibitions scheduled for the gallery and no exhibition proposals waiting to be reviewed. We had an empty gallery coming up in the next week. So I started sending some emergency messages to all my friends, and I'm really lucky to know some really wonderful and successful artists, and so I'm even luckier to have been able to call Scott a dear friend for many, many years. So among others, Scott is one of those friends that I reached out to. And I'm super grateful that he agreed to take a chance on creating an installation for us here. We need work like Scott's here. We have so many wonderful artists and creative folks who live locally, and many of us travel long distances to go to museums and other galleries and stay connected to a larger art scene more regularly. So having artists like Scott bring a museum quality installation experience to us here is a real gift. Getting to share artwork in a public arena like this library, where people pass by the glass wall that aren't necessarily expecting to see art, and getting to share art that challenges what many of us perceive as art, art that piques our curiosity and forces us to engage and immerse and ask questions, forces us to feel. That's the vital role of art. And I'm really grateful that this installation is helping to generate so much curiosity and great conversation, so many visceral responses, and also expanding perceptions about what art can be and what art is. One of my favorite parts among many of working with Scott on this installation has been witnessing the parade of wide eyes and open mouths as people pass the window of the gallery and enter the gallery. While Scott is perhaps most well known for his history of going into abandoned and long neglected spaces in Detroit and creating slow, intentional, mystical, and otherworldly installations out of wasted materials and detritus, documenting them with his skillful photography and then leaving them behind to be discovered or destroyed, it is a real gift when he brings his work into a more public space where more of us get the opportunity to directly immerse into the experience of the work in person, to discover all the multifaceted and layered nuances, the symbols, the mystical and sacred objects and elements, where we can investigate potential meaning and can seek the depth of the embedded conversations if we choose to, or where we can simply, and perhaps most importantly, just take in the raw, visceral experience of the environment and all that it offers to us and arouses within each of us as individuals. Scott has made an extremely successful career out of creating installations primarily with found objects, and more specifically, the materials that others have chosen to abandon, materials others have left behind to deteriorate without care or concern for their value, for the city, for the environment, or for their residual impact. While to some, working with found objects might appear simple on the surface, what Scott does is anything but simple. He is a deeply skillful artist. His work is layered, thoughtful, often deeply entrenched in historical research and awareness. It is intuitive, spiritual, archetypal, and mystical. It is often Sisyphean, backbreaking, and high-risk-taking work, and sometimes for very little financial reward. Through the process of transforming these objects and materials into his thoughtful and often spellbinding work, Scott's labor and vision offers the gift of restoring a sense of the sacred back into these long neglected objects and spaces. He shifts the energy of neglect back into an energy of care, and he transmutes the energy of the objects, often from mundane into mystical. His work makes us ask questions about time and perceptions of what we value, about human behavior, about what matters to us as humans, and why. It's impossible in just a few minutes to even begin to encapsulate all of Scott's work as an installation artist, sculptor, and photographer. And I know that what Scott has to say about his own work will be far more valuable than anything else I could add here, so I'll move on to some of the other good stuff. I really wanted to read Scott's bio to you because it is pretty much the best artist bio of all time, but I'm not a big fan of reading things to people that they can read themselves, and it's quite long. So do yourselves a favor, and after tonight's talk, hop on to scotthocking.com and read his bio, where you can find out if he's left or right-handed, what animals accompany him as guides, how many times he's been arrested, what year he'll die, whether or not he can drive a stick shift, and a lot of other great facts about Scott. Scott's resume is also extensive and incredibly impressive, and we'd be here all night if I read that as well, so I'll give you a few highlights, and so that you can have an idea of some of the great things CMU now gets to share the page with. Scott Hocking has exhibited artwork nationally and internationally, including institutions such as the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, the Smart Museum of Art, Contemporary Art Museum St. Louis, the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts Museum, that's my alma mater, the Mattress Factory Art Museum, the Detroit Institute of Arts, Cranbrook Art Museum, the Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit, the Eli and Edith Broad Art Museum at MSU, the University of Michigan Institute for the Humanities, the Van Abbe Museum, the Kunstwerke Institute, Kunsttelewein, and the Gare Saint-Sever in France. He has received awards such as the Joan Mitchell Foundation Artist Fellowship, that's a pretty big deal, a Kresge Artist Fellowship, a Knight's Art Challenge Grant, and Ephraimson, I forgot to check some of these pronunciations with you, Contemporary Arts Fellowship, as well as a residency grant in France, Ireland, Australia, Canada, Brazil, and throughout the United States. Scott's projects have been featured on top art journals such as Artforum, ArtNet, Art21, the New York Times, Forbes, Frieze, Time, Sculpture, Hyperallergic, Modern Painters, Bad at Sports, Vice, the Brooklyn Rail, the Art Newspaper, Modern Art Notes, the Art Assignment, the Wall Street Journal, the Atlantic, Beaux-Arts, Der Standard, La Repubblica, BBC Radio, National Geographic, PBS NewsHour, Yale University Press, Oxford University Press, and dozens of other Detroit-based periodicals. He is represented by David Klein Gallery in Detroit. Please join me in welcoming my dear friend and brilliant artist, Scott Hocking, to the stage.
crap, that's going to be, we can end it now, I'm pretty sure. Wow, thank you, Denise, that was really nice of you. It was really amazing to hear all that. I can answer a couple of those questions. I do not know how to drive a stick shift. It's embarrassing, but it's true. I don't know how to roller skate or ice skate. I'm left-handed. I have a dog that walks on my left and a crow that flies on my right. And what the hell was the other one that you?
Times arrested.
6. 7? 6 or 7. So, hi everyone. I like to do talks that are kind of chronological, so it'll take you through my life, really, that's led me to where I am now, here. Sometimes I'm going to go fast, sometimes I'm going to go slow, and sometimes it's going to be disjointed, but I try to give like some context to how the hell I ended up doing what I do, and all the things that Denise listed. So I like starting with this one because I was asked to pose for a painter's portrait, and he set up that still life that I kind of had my hand on. And then I was really embarrassed with how I looked in his photos, so I took my own photos of myself, and I tried to look cooler. So that's what you're looking at. But to just go way back, we're going to start. Get that cursor out of here. That's little Scott in the 1970s with a giant pair of headphones on. I grew up in a very working class circumstance in Redford Township, Michigan, which is adjacent to the northwestern border of Detroit. I learned how to use tools at a very young age. My dad was a car mechanic. He was kind of like a jack-of-all-trades type guy. And later in life, it would become very influential that not only did I know how to use tools, but that I would go to junkyards with him. Because later that would become like something that really resonated with me. That's the house that I grew up in. That's a 800 square foot asbestos shingled house in Redford, and that is the shadow of my grandfather, great-grandfather, who built it, or had it built. Then, this is the same house during COVID. It sold for $800 around maybe 2018 or 2019. It went up for auction. The neighborhood got really rough. So this 800 square foot house sold for $800, and then during COVID, there was a murder-suicide in it. And that window on the far side there that's busted out is because that's where the police busted in with their tear gas, and that was my childhood bedroom window. I want to point out that necklace somewhere in the left, that's an Avon silver spaceship that my mom got for me when she worked for Avon. I don't have that silk shirt anymore. I don't have hair like that anymore. And then I would play the drums and I would like listen to records on headphones, and the bass drum would make the records skip. Also, that Heather Thomas poster was my brother's. I was too young for that. And then this happened. So I had kind of a rough childhood, and I turned to drugs, and I was like not sure what I was doing with my life. I became kind of like a pot-smoking hippie for a few years. I like to talk about this stuff when I talk at universities, because I feel like it's the right age to kind of commiserate with you about those years. So yeah, I spent some time lost, as I would say. And then I took this trip out west to find myself. I was like completely, I would say depressed, didn't know what I was doing with my life. Around 18, maybe 19, I took this trip out west, and I had this very mystical experience in the desert of Death Valley, the dunes of Death Valley. It was really transformational. It was one of these moments where I would call it an epiphany, or some people would say like it was a glimpse of enlightenment, and it still to this day is a powerful time in my life, and I was energized by that, and I had some kind of direction after that. But I still look like this. This is me. I at one point lived in my car for 4 months. I was homeless. A couple times that happened, and just like really, really not sure what I was doing with myself. And I was living in Detroit, but I was very ready to get the fuck out of Detroit. And so I met a guy who had a car that he was going to drive out to Seattle, and we were going to work on farms along the way. And something that was really like pushed to college students around then was that in the summertime you could work for the fishing industry in Alaska, and you could make money, and you could go up there, and it was a bit like slave labor, like they trapped you in these fish factories or on a boat. And yeah, you made money, but it was like hell. But I was going to do it. I was going to get in this car, go to Seattle, that's where they hire you, go up to Alaska, and 3 days before that guy left, I got in a car accident.
Oh.
And it changed the course of my life. And then I ended up doing this. So instead of going to Seattle and go to the fishing industry, I had no car, no money. I was driving on a suspended license. I could have been arrested. I had no car insurance. I had quit my job already, so I had no job. My girlfriend and I had broken up. I was completely alone in a northwest corner of Detroit where Detroit doesn't have any public transportation. I was like stuck and depressed, and all my plans were ruined. And it was the first time in my life that I realized when you hit rock bottom, it comes with clarity. And suddenly you can kind of see things clearly because there's nothing else. And I could see that I was always told I was good at art, but I never believed in myself. I was good at music, art, drawing, writing. Never believed in myself. And once that accident happened, it was a big fuck it moment. It was like I could die at any moment. I don't care. I'm just gonna try it. And I took 2 buses down Grand River to Warren and applied at the College for Creative Studies in Detroit. I started in January. That accident was in October of '96, and I started in January of '97. So this is me in my intro to painting class, where the teacher told us to go out and paint still lifes, find things in Detroit that you want to paint. And at that time, there was an abundance of abandoned firebombed cars. And I was also starving, if you can't tell, because I'm certainly not that thin anymore. The guy across the street took these photos. It's the only reason I have evidence of this is some random stranger was like, I gotta photograph you. That's me in my studio. And that's an artist, some famous artist coming in talking to us. And if you look down in the corner there's a sculpture I'm working on. This is 1999. This is me learning how to paint. That's a self-portrait. That's why I didn't go into painting. I started making collage pieces. I started making stuff with found objects because I was broke and I knew how to use tools, and Detroit had this unreal abundance of wasted material in the 1990s. Partly, I would say I get inspired by things, but back then it was things that irritated me. I was pissed off that there was so much waste. I was pissed off that somebody had enough money to own a factory that I could never own in a million years, and they just let it go abandoned. They didn't care about the neighborhood, they didn't care about the size of the history, all the stuff in it abandoned. That made me angry. So I had no problem trespassing and taking garbage out and using it as material. I started working with metal, learning how to weld. I started finding things like those bricks all say Hocking on them. They say my name. I thought I was back on acid. It was amazing. And then I made the first version of this piece. So this is, it's basically a sewer grate, a domed sewer grate made by East Jordan Iron Works, which is in East Jordan, Michigan. They make all the sewer grates. If you walk around campus and look down at a sewer grate, it will say East Jordan Iron Works on it, or EJ. I took a mold of one that was in the front lawn of Henry Ford's former mansion in Dearborn. I asked them as a 20-something student if I could borrow their sewer grate, meant there would be a big hole in the front lawn, and take a mold of it, and they said yes. I don't know how or why. I took a mold and I made these spheres with these 2 sewer grates. To me, this was all these things I had, all the hallucinogens I'd taken, all the deep self-crisis or trauma exploration I'd done, all kind of led to me kind of being, I wouldn't say Buddhist, but more like Taoist. I became really interested in the world being duality and seeing things, seeing how we're all trying to reach some kind of unity or balance all the time. So the sewer grate to me became this mundane, everyday, emblematic symbol of we're above and that's below. And the sewer grate is like the filter through the threshold. It filters things in and out from the above and the below. And you can read into the mythology or mysticism of that. So I also thought it looked like a rib cage. And I started thinking about how like the human rib cage is what protects us and keeps us alive, but it also traps us. It's like what traps us in our mortal body is this. So this is the first version of that. I called it Neptune. And I started making pieces of found objects. This is the first time I did something where I'd call it site-specific. I started to expand into thinking like art doesn't have to be a painting on the wall or a sculpture on a pedestal. It could be out there. It could be a whole room, right? So I went around the city and I gathered thousands of empty liquor bottles. They're usually just left around because there's no 10-cent deposit for liquor bottles. And I gathered them, washed them, made these barrels, put them in these barrels, but the barrels had stories on them. So every time I'd go around the city with a shopping cart getting empty liquor bottles, people would talk to me. And I got a lot of interesting stories from that. It was also just a time in my life because of the car accident, because I lost the vehicle. It was the first time I'd never had a vehicle in Detroit, which is, it's hard to get anything done without a car in Detroit. So I walked everywhere, and walking slows things down. You become more observant. You find things, you see things you didn't see when you're walking. So the railroad tracks, just experiencing things by walking. But it also led to this, probably the beginnings of my photo series were photographing at night. So I would walk with the camera at night, take photos. That's the Boblo boat, the abandoned Boblo boat. So I have a long-standing series called Detroit Nights, and it's just me photographing Detroit at night. The railroad tracks were also really important to me because I grew up near them. So there's something deep in me, like if I hear the sound of a train at night, there's some kind of like, it hits me on like a deep subconscious level. This is an example. I think these photos to me are showing you what Detroit looked like when I was doing this work. There were lots of places like this. Like this building was full of garbage, full of things that were left behind. They demolished it and then left it like that for years. It's only recently been cleaned up. So again, angry because wasted material. I hate that humans just leave a trail of destruction wherever they go. It's like this ongoing cycle of humans destroying and leaving waste. But also potential. Seeing the beauty in this, seeing that I can use this. I think that I was heartened by or encouraged by that whenever we would do stuff like this, nature would take over. Pretty quickly, trees and plants, animals just taking over, like Pripyat, the town that's around Chernobyl. It's just the way nature comes back, there's something that makes you feel like, all right, no matter how much we fuck shit up, if we're gone, the earth will keep going. This was 33rd Street in Detroit. It's really a great, it's like a still life of all the things that were material I could have used back then. Abandoned boats, mattresses, you can see a van that was burned and flipped upside down over there that was probably stolen and stripped. Just the amount of dumping debris. Again, to me, that was material that I wanted to use. I wanted to recycle this and use it. This junkyard is long gone, but these were all Packards. And Detroit is kind of famous for having abandoned auto factories, but one of the most famous is the Packard plant. So this was just a thing that you'd see at that era in Detroit. This is the mid-90s to the late 90s. The Studebaker plant. And this is the street where the automobile was kind of started, Piquette Street. The first Ford factories down there. Studebaker was here. Fisher Body. That was Dave's Drive-In on the right side where I would eat like a shitty meal at a shitty diner and then go into that building and get material out. And I really was like a homeless guy. Then I would push a shopping cart full of material. And it was just so commonplace to see that in Detroit, that people were pushing carts full of stuff. So this is where a transition happens. For years I was going into these buildings and I was doing, like I said, putting materials in a shopping cart, taking them to my studio, making things. And it just started to transition to me that I was taking photos, but I wasn't thinking of myself as a photographer. I wasn't trained. And I was getting material out of these buildings, but I wasn't feeling like the sculptures I was making were communicating what it was like to be in these places. Like it wasn't, the feeling of being in these places was powerful, It was like layers of history and so much information, and you were just kind of blown away by it. And you felt like the same feeling you feel like when you go in the woods. All your senses come alive. It felt like that. And sculptures weren't doing it. So this was a transition point where I started to feel like the work needs to be like all encompassing. It needs to somehow be surrounding you the same way you're surrounded when you're in the building. So if you look at the grill of this old Dodge, you'll see it's right in that box. This was the first big site-specific, large-scale like room installation I did. I did it with a good friend of mine named Clinton Snyder. And Clinton and I proposed to the DIA for the 300th birthday of Detroit to make this room we called the reliquary room, relics. Like relics in a mystical sense, relics in a kind of archaeological sense. And it would be made out of hundreds of these 18-inch square boxes, all found objects, all found in Detroit. That was one wall. There were 4 walls and the floor. Some of them were just like shelves, kind of like saying, these are yet to be filled. But if you look, there's those damn balls again. They start to become like self-portraits to me. Like now they're really emblematic of me. That's how I'm seeing them. So, but again, threading the things in that nobody really knows, but I'm telling you, but you wouldn't know if you went there, is that I'm thinking about all kinds of shit when I'm putting these together. I'm doing the drawings, I'm doing the measurements, and then I'm getting really deep and mystical. Everything's based on feng shui, because it's Taoism. So the different spheres are representing the different elements, the different colors. I have to have water in one corner. I'm kind of still thinking like that about things for myself that I don't know if anybody knows, but for me it's like a personal thing. And then we did it many different versions. We kept on moving it to different locations. This was kind of an ARC version at Marygrove College. At some point we started selling them because where the fuck do I store all this? So at some point it became like, oh, we gotta start getting rid of these. We were very highfalutin at first. I remember the DIA said they were gonna buy a wall. And then they reneged at the end. They were like, we decided we can't store it anywhere. So after that we were really like, we're not breaking it up, we'll only sell it as a wall. And that lasted about a year before I think we were like, we can't put this anywhere. So as they sold and we'd reinstall it, we'd have to make new ones. I would say I've made hundreds of these over the years because there's so many that have been dispersed. This version in Windsor, I decided to do something even more site-specific, and you can see there's a boat right there. So that boat is coming out of a box. That boat was found in an abandoned lot in Detroit, and there was a tree growing through it. So I just decided, well, now there's a column going through it. These kinds of like organic steps were me figuring out new things. I certainly didn't know what I was doing at first, but I'm kind of like moving through the stages of figuring out how to work site-specifically, thinking about the gallery versus the outside, and working on that site versus this site. So playing with that dichotomy. It also was a time when I was starting to take photos, not just of Detroit at night, but like other locations. Sometimes I'd bring the camera with me because I thought if I ever got caught for trespassing, I could say I'm just taking photos. And eventually it became like, oh, I really like taking photos. It really is true, I'm taking photos. So around that same time, in the late 90s, I started photographing what I consider to be anomalies around Detroit. And one of the anomalies was that people would dump boats. Detroit is a river city. It's born from the water. It's, grown so far from the water because of the automobile that people still use cars. So to me, there was something really poetic and strange about a city based on the water, a river town, that moved away from the river to become a car town that now has abandoned boats on abandoned streets. And they say things like security. So I just started photographing the abandoned boats around the city, and I honestly feel like I've been working on a book of these photos because I've been doing it since 1999, technically, is the first time I think I took photos of boats. But the book will be like you know, an encyclopedia. So I have to be better at editing. But I'm still, to this day, if I'm driving and I see a boat, I have to take a photo of it. This is a transition of how boats, but also scrapping. So that is a hole cut out so they could get the motor. Another Detroit kind of anomaly is that the city had so much abandoned buildings, so many abandoned places, that there was an abundance of wasted metal. And it birthed a legion of scrappers, people who scrapped metal by going into these buildings and pulling out the pipes, pulling out the radiators, taking any copper they could find. So in 2003, I was asked to be part of an exhibition where I focused on scrappers. And these are guys who I'd be working in an abandoned building and they'd be working in an abandoned building, but we wanted very different things. They wanted things they could sell, I wanted things that were considered garbage. So we weren't competitors, but we'd see each other all the time. This was Bernie. He lived on the street on Jefferson. That's Country Boy. So Country Boy lived in the building that was 2-minute walk, still is 2 minutes walk from my studio, and he would get the copper wire and then they would burn the plastic off. So you burn the plastic off, the copper's cleaner, you get more money for the copper. These guys would do the same thing, except they would put it in the tower, which used to be a coal tower, and they would burn the plastic off in there. That's the angel prophet Eli Wheeler. I loved his name. I did a big collage of him. And then I ended up doing an exhibition where I showed that shopping cart, 200 pounds of copper from Country Boy, bought him that much caramel corn from my gas station. So to get that caramel corn, you'd have to lift. It was like a pulley system. So you'd have to pull, and then the copper would raise. It's like crazy amount of physical labor for very little money. But to me, that was a pretty interesting thing, because it was like a job. They were still doing a job. They weren't like begging for money. They were doing a job, and it was hard work, and it was like an unseen level, an untaxed, invisible level in the metal industry, because all this stuff goes to the scrap yards, and you know, the cycle begins. So another abundant material that was dumped throughout Detroit, still is, but back then to a staggering degree, tires. Tires, to this day, there's not a really good recycled use for tires that people will commit to. We know that we could put shredded tires in the roads and the roads will last forever. Well, the people who make roads don't want that. They make money on making roads. So maybe in Finland, they're doing it, but not here. So a common thing is you go and you get your tire fixed. Well, next time that happens, you'll see on your bill, there'll be like a $5 fee for recycling your old tire. What's supposed to happen is they're supposed to take all your old tires and they all get recycled. But what often happens is they take all your old tires and dump them here. So I proposed this idea that I would make a sculpture out of these tires. The nasty, scum-filled, mosquito-infested piles of shitty tires. And hilariously, it was accepted by the very first fundraiser for the Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit. They agreed to let me make this sculpture on the front lawn of an extremely wealthy person in the suburb of Detroit. So I made a tire pyramid. 2,109 tires. I love this photo because of him.
Yeah.
You can tell he's like wondering when the hell is this thing going to get taken down. And then my favorite part is when it was taken down, it ruined the lawn. But I'm pretty sure they had that resodded like the next day or something. But just to give another like really Detroit story, the deal was I'd gather all these tires from the city, bring them out, do this installation, and then the museum would pay for them to be properly recycled, which was about $4.5 grand. So they did, the trucks came, took all the tires, took them down to a place in Detroit where they're supposed to be recycled, dumped them, and then said that their shredder was broken. That was 2006, and if you look on Google Earth, the pile of tires is still there in this now defunct junkyard that never recycled them. So what I did in the end was move tires around. This is Fisher Body. So Fisher Body is it's a 5-minute walk from my studio. it was a building I spent so much time in getting materials when I was in art school that it was like my second home. These places became like solaces to me, a bit like churches. Like I'd go in them, the light coming through the windows, the solitude, nature had reclaimed them. There'd be birds, sometimes stray dogs. I'd go on the roof, have a picnic. Like I really enjoyed being in these. I considered them like little hikes in nature in Detroit. They were like the closest I got to like climbing a mountain and seeing a view. So this building I spent so much time in, I just wanted to work with it. And it was really the first light bulb moment of thinking, if I work site specifically, if I build something in a building like this, instead of taking material out, people will discover it and find it, sure, but if they don't, I could take photos of it. So it was the first time I thought of these dual projects where I'm taking photos and making sculptures, very different audiences, the people who find it in person, graffiti artists, scrappers, and then the people who come to a museum or a gallery, very different. And I kind of like that dichotomy and playing with that. So in the Fisher body, oh, there I am. Look at it, I'm laboring away. I built this pyramid. So this is 6,201 blocks. And this was definitely a turning point because it was a really light bulb moment for me and I was super excited about it. And it was crazy, like Sisyphean task, like Denise said. But I also think people thought I was crazy. Like, imagine when I started building this, that I started with like, 3 or 4 blocks. And then I had to keep going and keep going and keep going. So anybody who stumbled onto me in the winter with a ski mask on like this, in this abandoned building, yeah, they thought I was insane. And I think even some friends of mine were like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, nobody's paying me to do this. It wasn't a commission. I was like obsessed, like the guy in Close Encounters who was building the mashed potatoes, Devil's Tower. But you Google my name now and you get this picture. It's a really weird thing about art. Sometimes when you just have this urge and this intuition and you don't even know why you're doing it or what you're doing, sometimes you figure it out later. And it like becomes clear later. So with this piece, it was a huge like light bulb moment and a beginning of me really wanting to work in this dual way where I work site specifically and make a photo series out of it. This is a giant prop for a photo series, but it's also a site specific thing that people can find. And it was just like one of these things where I felt, oh shit, I want to keep doing this. Like I suddenly wanted to go anywhere and do this, travel and do this. So I was in China. And I did this. I had a friend who lived in Shanghai. She was like, you should come visit sometime. So I went to China. And I spent like a few days. I built this. I found a mannequin. I built a hut. And then like 2 weeks later, this building was demolished. Because things don't last very long in Shanghai. I could have been in there, to be honest. People ask me sometimes if I've ever this sometimes is a question at the end of lectures. Have you ever been scared? You ever get injured? You ever hurt yourself? You can see the lattice work of concrete in this building. I was on a floor like this, where I couldn't see the floor, and I fell through a hole. And I thought the whole building was collapsing, and I got kind of caught. My arms got kind of caught. I was hanging, and your adrenaline goes bananas. And I thought, like, oh, the whole building's collapsing. And it turned out I was able to get out. I was able to get to a stairwell. That there was one hole in the floor, that big, this like old rotten wood, and I had stepped on it like a trap. But it's the closest I ever felt to like falling to my death. So, abrupt transition. Knowing that I want to work site specifically, it doesn't mean I'm always going to work in abandoned industrial or post-industrial buildings or cities. This is in the jungles of Florida. This is the Fountain of Youth vending machine. So if you happen to be traipsing through the jungles of the New Smyrna Beach area of Florida near South Daytona, you might find this vending machine. And if you have 2 quarters, you can get the eternal elixir of life and live forever. I don't know if that's still there. I also at this time decided to dig a big hole. And then it became a power pyramid. I did that with my buddy Graham White in his backyard. And at some point, his wife was like, we need to fill in that hole that you guys dug. This is another example of a building in Detroit that's really, really changed. This is Roosevelt Warehouse. It was originally a mail building, like all the mail would come by rail and then get sorted in this building. And then it became the Detroit Public Schools repository for everything. Books, things from kindergarten to high school, every test, every toy, every sports object, globes, maps, and then it burned. So everything in here just became rubble, and all the books became soil, and then trees grew from that. I used to get in there through a hole in a window, another thing that I could never do with my human form anymore, but I climbed through a window that big to get in, like Houdini. This is what it looked like. Those were all books and tests and whatnot. So another building where I just wanted to use this wasted material and get things out. This building has been renovated by Ford. They cleaned it out. It's right next to the train station in Detroit. And I've gone to it 3 times in the last 2 weeks. It's like unbelievable. It's astonishing that they were able to save it. But for me, I used it as a kind of an archaeological dig. So I decided that all these things are artifacts, future artifacts. It's another running theme for me. I'm critical of science. I'm critical of how we interpret and perceive people from the past, ancient people. I don't think we really know what the hell we're talking about. I think we're guessing a lot. And anytime people talk about it with confidence, like we know this, we know that, I think, yeah, I think they were saying the same thing 100 years ago, and we know they were wrong now. So I feel very skeptical of how we interpret people from the past through objects and through relics. And I'm interested in talking about how are we going to be perceived through our artifacts? How will we be seen and judged and talked about? Are they going to get sarcasm? Are they going to understand like melted plastic blobs that used to be video cassettes? Like, how are they going to interpret us when we know certain things are going to last a long time and do not decay? So this is a pseudo-archaeological dig, and that's a cauldron in the middle. It's an object of worship. It's a book cauldron, and all those books say discoveries. Hilariously, those books are really boring. They're like 3rd grade reading books or something, but they have a cool cryptic title. Like, what are they going to think of the new book of knowledge that's not very interesting? You know what that is on the left side? Anybody? Shout it out. Drinking straws. A bundle of plastic drinking straws that melted. This is where the ancient artifacts of Detroit used to be. This is where the Native American earthworks and mound sites were in Detroit. They're right by the river. This is where the Great Mound of the Rouge was. There's very little evidence of that because Detroit's an old city. 1701 is pretty old for west of the Appalachian Mountains. And most of this was destroyed before the idea of archaeologically studying and documenting this stuff even was around. Like before the University of Michigan had a Department of Archaeology, these were mostly destroyed. So there's a few pieces of evidence that these existed and stories, but like most of it is gone. So for me, the fact that it's now one of the most industrialized part of the city, again, something to be infuriated by, stupid human behavior, but also really interesting to me to go deep into researching and understanding the history of a place, the layers of history. That's Zug Island in the background. That's where they had been making iron for 100 years. It just shut down, and this is now the site of the new bridge to Canada. So you can't even get here anymore. It's the underneath part of the bridge. So I kind of started to play with the idea of like, what are the mound sites us irritating white dudes are leaving behind? It's garbage. We're leaving rubble piles behind. Like, it's not sacred. It's not something that respects the earth. It's just these terrible, wasteful things. So playing with that and being critical of us became another ongoing series, and I've been photographing mound sites for almost 20 years. That's the incinerator of Detroit in the background, also has been demolished. I made my own mound, my midden mound. This is just a bunch of junk from my studio, piled up, dramatically lit. I did a version of that in St. Louis at the Contemporary Museum there. This is what St. Louis looked like. It was called Mound City. And across the river from St. Louis, across the Mississippi, there's a site called Cahokia. Cahokia has been well preserved. It's one of the best preserved ancient Native American sites in America. St. Louis was like a suburb of Cahokia in the year 1000. Cahokia had a population that was bigger than London in the year 1000. So to me, that's fascinating. Of course, that's all gone. So I went around St. Louis and wanted to see what was now where these were. One of the buildings was an abandoned toxic waste transfer station. Cool, right? Progress, doing great things. So I made a mound of used rubber gloves that were just left behind in a toxic waste transfer station. That's toxic glove mound. I made a stone circle in an abandoned train station depot. I made a 55-gallon drum pyramid. You know, it's just, yeah. There's a little bit of humor in my work, I guess, like irritated humor. In Detroit, I started a project at the Packard plant. The Packard plant, giant automobile factory that had last been used for storage and then went abandoned. So it just full of stuff, again, that was just wasted material that had been stored there and neglected and left behind. In one room, there were about 100 old television sets. And the roof of this area of the building collapsed, and you can see that in the distance, the city, the metropolis, there's also a cemetery in the distance. But I decided to haul these television sets up to the roof in the winter, like a genius, put a wooden ladder against them, pushed them up, put them on top, and decided this was the new pantheon of the gods. So it's influenced by, like, you know, when you go to Rome and you see the ruins in Rome, you've got like Bernini's sculptures at the top of the gods. Well, we know who our new gods are. That's Zeus right there, all by himself. And like most things I make, what I find really fascinating is when you make work like this, you know that people are going to discover it, and I like that. I like the idea that people are going to stumble upon this and kind of have a moment of, holy shit, what the fuck is that? If I've made work, like when you're walking down that hall for the first time and you see that sloth butt, right? And you go, holy shit, what the fuck is that? Then I've succeeded. I'm like, success. But the thing is, that's fascinating to me, especially when you make work out in the field, so to speak, is that the next thing that happens interests me. People are either going to go, this is cool, I'm going to photograph this. Or they're going to go, I need to destroy this. I need to fuck this shit up. And that is fascinating. How people react is really interesting to me. So these got destroyed. But one or two was left, and I know that even the people who destroyed them were like, yeah, but we'll leave those two, because I want to photograph those two. So a similar project was in an abandoned power plant in Utica, upstate New York. Well, like a lot of towns like Saginaw or Flint, Utica was an industrial town that's small, and its industry was textile. That's an abandoned power plant for a textile mill. And I decided I was Sisyphus. I built the stone at the top, and then when the stone was hanging there, it kind of broke in half on its own, and it looked to me like this famous painting by Magritte called The Voice of Space. And I decided that that's the voice of space, and I was Sisyphus, so the project is called Sisyphus and the Voice of Space. I left it behind. Who knows what happened to that? I went to Australia, did a project there. I built these breaking wheels out of trees and vines. Breaking wheels were like a form of crucifixion. You'll find them in like Peter Bruegel's paintings, where instead of being put on a cross, you were put on a wheel at the top of the post. And I always thought that they were kind of this strange mix of like brutal torture, and yet the objects look kind of like these beautiful flowers. And that strange dichotomy was interesting to me. So I made like 6 of these and left them out there. And then I did this. So there was an artist in Australia who's really famous, and I was looking through his photos, and he has a photo where he's out in the desert in Australia, and it looks like he's about to mount a horse. And after a minute, you notice the ribs. That's not a live horse. So I tried to reenact it. It was hard to do. I made a piece based on the idea of Tartarus. As you can see, Tartarus is worse than hell, but better than chaos. Tartarus is the place where like Sisyphus has to roll the boulder up the mountain. Tantalus is always hungry. He's trying to get a fruit, but it moves away. He's trying to drink, but the water vanishes. A lot of the gods who have these kind of famous stories, like the liver, Prometheus' liver being eaten, were put in Tartarus as punishment. So I made my own version of punishment in Tartarus with empty grocery bags that I gathered around Detroit. Every spring, when the snow melts, you find all the trash that's blown around and was covered in snow, and there's just so many plastic bags. So I put these trees up in there, decided my little sphere was Tantalus in the pool, and man, I loved it, because people came to this exhibition not knowing, and it's a small room, and they were like getting hit on the head by garbage bags, and it smelled terrible, and everybody was uncomfortable, and I was like, yes. So this is another transition, but I like it because, like, to me, this is emblematic of whenever something gets your interest, just do it. Like, it doesn't have to line up with other things you're doing. So I drive around Detroit, I walk around Detroit, and I have all these serious interests, but then shit like this would crack me up. This is a gang tag for a gang called the Cobras. And I'm like, that's not a scary cobra, that cobra looks ridiculous. So that's funny to me. So at some point I had this light bulb moment of, oh, like, I think that I want to make a photo series of all this bad graffiti. Of like stuff where like, it's clearly like a drunken teenager painting it. This is like a greatest hits one. So you've got everything. There's a tiny penis over there, there's a guy vomiting. Somebody wrote Satan. They tried to make the Detroit Tigers thing look really bad. The cat saying meow, I don't know. I think that's a big turtle and a little turtle, a baby turtle. I don't really know, like, what's going on here. Of course there's boobs. There's got to be a penis of boobs. Right? So I documented that, and it ended up being a book called Bad Graffiti. I got published because somebody was like, oh, we can make money off this. But what's interesting to me is this, I ended up accidentally documenting a very specific time in Detroit because this doesn't happen anymore. And it doesn't happen anymore because this happens now. Because the new mayor instituted harsh fines. So if you don't paint over your graffiti quick, you get like increasingly leveled higher fines. So a lot of them are painted with like the cheapest paint they can get, the Oops paint from Home Depot. So the colors end up being mixed, and it ends up being these abstract paintings. So I have another series that bookends off the bad graffiti that's Buff Detroit, but I do want to point out that I'm pretty sure those are testicles. At one time they were. And then the other anomaly series is I just try and photograph things that I think are vanishing around Detroit, but a lot of them are signage, because some of my earliest jobs before I went to art school were sign painter jobs. I got really good at doing font and lettering. I worked for a grocery store where I did all their signs for 2 years, Nino Savaggio's. I was the sign painter. They called me Mr. Artist. It was the first time I was like, oh, I'm an artist. So old hand-painted signs and just like words, language that's left by itself and becomes kind of mystical is interesting to me. Like that. This was a building painted like a Mondrian painting. It's now painted brown. So vanishing things, trying to capture these things before they vanish. That's the hood ornament of a 1955 Mercury Monterey. So this is a series of work I did that's kind of connected to alchemy. Alchemy is like the idea, in my mind, it's the idea that you can transform, you can transmutate, you can go from something base metal to something gold and pure. I mean, I think it's like almost some kind of a study in trying to reach enlightenment, like a lot of religions. But one of the things they talk about in alchemy is mercury, salt, and sulfur are the trinity. So I started making these installations about that. Mercury is also the god Hermes, the messenger god. Amongst other things, Mercury or Hermes is the god who takes you to the next realm when you die. So I used all of these dead animals in this Natural History Museum in Grand Rapids, and then I ended up doing another version of it at the Suzanne Hilberry Gallery in Detroit. They loaned me 300 taxidermied animals, They can never be shown to the public, according to them, even though I did show them to the public. They can never be shown to the public again because taxidermy used to be made with arsenic. So they have to always keep them. So like these goddamn beautiful things are just never going to be seen again. Stored away. This exhibition was called The End of the World. I did it in 2012. And I was kind of playing with themes of the world ending. Specifically because that year, in 2012, people were talking about the Mayan calendar end date. And I read a book when I was pretty young. I didn't read the whole thing, but I remember reading parts of it. That was called Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. And I think I picked it up because of that title. And it basically talked about how humans always think two things. We always think we're in the most important time. We always think we've progressed so far from the past that we're the most smartest, most important time. And we always think we're in the end time. That we also think that it's going to end soon. And that ties in really deeply, not only to my own artwork, but this idea that I think humans have of innate creation mythology and destruction mythology, and how it kind of always is threading through. So I made the End of the World bookshelf. And the End of the World bookshelf is just any idea that people have of what they think end of the world means. So anything from somebody thinking the world's definitely ending between here and here, which it didn't, to, I don't know, the idea that the world never ends, or the Hopi idea that we're in like the 4th generation of humans, that we've nearly destroyed ourselves 3 other times, that there is no end. You know, this kind of circle of life, reincarnation, there is no end. This is all illusion. So the word Maya, the Mayan calendar date, the Maya, had an end of their calendar, and people were interpreting that as, oh, the Maya think this is going to be another end date. But the word Maya in Hindu means illusion. And I love the idea that, like, how can the world end if none of this is real? It just keeps going forever. The whole thing started with that book called Survival. You can see it was an abandoned building book. It has mold on it. At the opening, we had beer called La Fin du Monde. And I did a couple versions of it. Train station in Detroit. So same thing with the train station. A building I've been going into since the 90s. Now I was like, I want to work in here. I want to be in it. So, spent a lot of time there. Like I said, my mountain in the city, I could oversee the city. Nature took over. And I used the broken marble that used to line the walls to make a sculpture. When I got to this stage, they were starting to clean the building out. Ford now owns this building, and Ford has completely renovated this building. Another like miracle in Detroit. But when I got to this stage, a building inspector saw it and said, he has to stop, it's going to fall through the floor. So I took these photos and I stopped. And then a couple months later, I got a phone call that the asbestos workers had built this for me on the floor below so that I could keep working. And when I came in and saw it, I was like, why did you paint it red? And they were like, we thought it looked better red. And I was like, holy shit, we just collaborated. Like, you're an artist now, and we just collaborated. So I was able to finish it. It's about 8 feet tall. I considered it like, you know, my aura. Like the egg is like my aura. But it's also just an ancient symbol, the egg. The egg is like really, it's like the gestating idea, the unborn potential. It's about to become and rebirth something new. And I'm so fucking happy that the train station did rebirth. And I like that you come down a hallway and see that. Like you turn a corner and go, again, holy shit, what the fuck is that? It's all kind of part of a larger series where I work with cast concrete buildings and I collect stalagmites from these abandoned cast concrete buildings that have turned into caves. Water gets through and stalagmites are created the same way. It's me on a giant dodo. So this connects to the piece that's here. I started to find these abandoned tourist traps. In this case, an abandoned dinosaur tourist trap. It was called Prehistoric Forest. And in northern Michigan, I found an abandoned tourist trap called Good Shepherd Scenic Gardens that was supposed to be a walk through the story of the Bible. So it's material, It's wasted, it's loaded. I thought, I want to do something with this. So I proposed, I had some exhibitions, and I try and find ways to like squeeze in ideas into projects. And I had an exhibition at the Mattress Factory in Pittsburgh and at MoCA in Detroit. And I decided I wanted to make something. I remember telling Denise I wanted it to be called the Bible Ball. I thought I was going to make a big sphere out of these. So Denise came out, there's Denise, dug out these bodies with me, exhumed all these bodies of the snow, like a foot of snow in the winter. The guy who owned the property was happy to sell them to me. He did not care about, his father built this installation, he did not care. So it was kind of a great thing to save them. I think $20 each I paid for every figure. There they are. I did not get pulled over, thankfully. This was not one of the times I was arrested. That's me hugging a giant prehistoric sloth. I don't know if you guys have seen any giant prehistoric sloths lately, but that's a version of one. That one I did not get, and I loved him. He was covered in moss. He was so disgusting. It was great. This is that really happened. It was really terrifying. I was really injured. So this is the first version I did of that. I called it The Secrets of Nature. And again, playing with this idea of this obscure object of worship. This is a future primitive society. These are people in the future, after the next cataclysmic catastrophe event that levels out the human race and we have to come back. And they're discovering our artifacts and interpreting them. And what will they consider mystical? What will they consider powerful or unexplainable and worship? In this case, it's an unfinished fiberglass whale, but I think it looks a bit like a sweet potato. I did a version in Pittsburgh, and I used a hot metal car. So these train cars in Pittsburgh that molten iron gets poured into, and then they can take the molten iron and pour it out like a big ladle. And when you see these machines in person, you're like, what the fuck? Like, this is an amazing, crazy monster machine. And unless you work in the steel industry, I don't think you know what they are. So again, a mystical artifact, and I made it the object of worship in the basement of the Mattress Factory. But I left an Easter egg. If you were a bad person and climbed on the artwork, if you got on top, you could see that you could get inside. And if you were even crazier and got inside, there was a reading room. There was a carpet and a fake fireplace, and I had Dante's Inferno down there. So another version I did was in Grand Rapids, and another mystical object, this kind of like the ball, a wrecking ball, essentially. But you can see the sloth hovering there in the background. I painted the walls based on a 1970s Emerson, Lake and Palmer album that had that kind of line font. Then I went out to Germany, worked in this old quarry, built another egg, left it with these old computers. And then in Detroit, I made these crop circles. I went around with a weed whipper, tied it to a post, weed whipped in circles. This one is based on the exact crop circle that is on the Led Zeppelin box set. Photographed with drone, and then they were immediately destroyed. This whole area of Detroit now has a giant factory, like a huge, I think it's called Flexengate, works for the auto industry. Playing with mystical artifacts, like things that we don't know what they are, and thinking about future things. So this, I call this Rusty Sputnik, and I call this Rustic Sputnik. Rusty Sputnik is actually a cyclonic dust collector that goes on top of a building that sucks up sawdust if it's a wood shop. But putting it outside, removing the tubes, putting in some windows in it, and nobody has any idea what the hell it is. It still smelled, though, like the tobacconist factory that was there. So if you stuck your head in, you would smell like hookah tobacco, which made it even more confusing for people. And this used to be a garage. So a garage was demolished, and I just built this artifact out of it and left it. And I should say that almost everything you've seen was destroyed. So the pyramid, the egg, this, everything. The photographs are all that exist. It's like this exercise in letting go for me. It's an exercise in just making something and having no control of whether you'll finish, it'll be destroyed, it'll be graffitied, it'll be gone in 2 years. I like that element of letting go. This is called Narcissus Incorporated, another factory where I used everything in there and made this kind of like pseudo office space and made these strange alien penises on the side that you had to walk through to get in. So in northern Michigan in the Thumb, I was commissioned to make a piece out of an old barn. This is the barn. And that's what I did. I took it down and I rebuilt it as a ship. I originally wanted to make it, just take the barn and rebuild it upside down, but then you can see from the storm in this photo, crazy storms and wind hit the Thumb of Michigan, so I decided to make it more narrow. I call it the Celestial Ship of the North, which is based on a kind of like old esoteric book. But I also call it the barn boat. The barn boat is my favorite thing, but people still call it the emergency ark because it looks a bit like an ark. And I like playing with, again, mythology and the ever-present theme of the Great Flood. That's a theme that's gone through all kinds of different religions, all kinds of ancient stories, creation and destruction mythologies often include this idea of a flood. At some point we're going to be underwater, and this will not float. Do not go to it if the flood does happen. You will not survive. This is still there. This is one of the only pieces that hasn't been torn down. It's still standing. It's leaning a little bit, but if you ever go up to Port Austin in the Thumb, it's still there. You can visit it. That's the inside. You can't go inside. Only I can visit. In northern France, I was asked to do a piece in this giant abandoned train station. And again, using what was there, railroad ties, Belgian block, stone, and then playing with this idea of the French salon. So these are all framed artifacts, kind of playing with the French salon, but a lot of them are found around the train station, but also in the like giant flea market that happens in the city of Lille where I was. And you had to look through this window, because you weren't allowed to go in there, and see this kind of archaeological site that I created. I called it Babel. But again, like I like the idea that you don't know what the hell happened here, but something's happening here, right? People are sitting on those things, I think. In Indianapolis, I went into an abandoned RCA factory where they used to make RCA records that then became a recycling plant, and then the recycling plant went abandoned. All these great things humans do, right? So all this stuff that was supposed to be recycled never got recycled, left behind, burned, wasted trash, and I did an archaeological dig there. I got all these melted plastic artifacts, decided that they were artworks, hung them on the wall, curated it, and made this kind of foamy glacier mountain mystical thing in the background. I like the ones that look like alien intestines. I was commissioned to do another piece at a place where I found out that the guy believed in sacred geometry. So I built these Platonic solids, Archimedean solids, made this kind of altarpiece, burning area there, terracotta turtle shells, and left it. And I just got an email from them like in the last month. They said, you gotta come back and see your piece. It's like completely covered so that when you're walking through the woods, you just see them like peeking out. And I was like, great. They look like artifacts. People wonder, what the hell is that? And it might lead them to discover. This is the hanging cairn. Cairns are basically like ancient stack stones. So the egg I made in the train station is just an ancient stack of stones. I decided to do a version in Austin, Texas, where I hung it from the ceiling, like a burial pod. And I honestly don't know what happened to this one either. I think that they might have torn the whole building down. That's a bone cairn. That's the catacombs in Paris. I loved this thing. I sat there with this thing for a long time. And that's a mystical object that I found this photo and it just said, unknown object. So I made my own version. I hate this column. It's a gallery in Detroit that I show at called David Klein. They have this column in the middle and I hate it. So I decided to turn it into part of the installation. I made myself a bone mound with this kind of strange column. Because my English side are Cornish copper miners who came to Michigan's UP to mine copper. So those are all their copper skulls. And leg bones and other bones, mostly skulls. Railroad ties, another abandoned object all around the country, but in Detroit for sure. 300 railroad ties, took them to the Broad Museum. Made this piece, I called it the cow catcher. It made the whole museum smell terrible. They loved it. People came in and like complained that I was killing their children with the toxic fumes. They had their version of the EPA come in and test it multiple times. It was safe, but I just loved it because like that's creosote. That's what preserved wood for most of our lives. That's what railroad ties and telephone poles and pilings in the water, creosote. But it's a coal tar derivative and it smells like petroleum. If you've ever walked the railroad, you know it. So people in the museum were suddenly confronted with this very working class thing. And I liked that. I liked that they were like suddenly like, oh shit. If a guy came in who worked on the railroad, he'd be like, oh, this is awesome. But if someone had never been on the railroad, they'd be scared. And I like confronting that situation, taking a space that's supposed to be a clean space and making it filthy. Speaking of filthy, these are sewer pipes. This is an abandoned water and sewerage plant in Detroit, and they abandoned all these sewer pipes. So I proposed the idea of making a version of Stonehenge, but with shit pipes. Shitty Stonehenge. This is called 17 Shitty Mountains. I named it that because there's a famous artwork near Las Vegas called 7 Magic Mountains. Ugo Rondinone, a very successful artist, stacked boulders, painted them day-glow colors, and people pull off the freeway and photograph themselves with these giant glowing boulders. I get irritated with work that I feel like is super digestible and PC and like Instagram friendly. I don't know, like whatever it is where I feel like, oh, I don't feel like he's doing something interesting. I think he's doing something that people are going to go, this would look great on my front lawn because I'm rich. So I made my own version, but they're made out of shit pipes and garbage, and no one will ever want them, right? I called mine 17 Shitty Mountains instead of 7 Magic Mountains. That was just full of trash. Really favorite one. This was really dangerous. I shouldn't have done that. Each one of those pipes weighs 11,000 pounds. So if you want to do the math, that's 5.5 tons times that many. And then I got commissioned to do the day-glow version at the gallery next door. So now I'm like, what do they say, lipstick on a pig? Like now I'm shining up and painting these crap pipes with day-glow colors, and somebody bought that one. It's in their backyard. I don't know. I have this like thing. I know it's my background, but like there's a little bit of Robin Hood. Like if I can make something that was, if they found that out in the field where it's wasted and they would never think of buying it. But if I can change it so that they do, I feel like Robin Hood a bit. Also, it could be a dance party because it glows. These are still an Eastern market, but they're very decayed now and they're getting like graffitied and I love it. So the recent work that I've done has a lot to do with historical things. And in this case, this is a factory in Detroit that was burning bones in the 1800s, and it was at one time Detroit's biggest industry. They were burning animal bones to make a black powder that they used as fertilizer. They used it for other things, but they also used it as a pigment. This famous photograph is taken in Detroit at the Carbon Works facility. This is another angle of that photo. These photos are in the Burton Historic Collection, the Detroit Public Library. I'm pretty sure the two dudes there and the guy on top in there, these are the owners of the plant. It turns out that in the late 1800s, when they discovered that they could make fertilizer out of bones, there became like a bone craze. Suddenly plants like this in Detroit were getting bones shipped to them by rail from all over the Great Plains. So these are all bison skulls. It's really emblematic of how the white man nearly eradicated the American buffalo. But it was in such demand that then there became a bone crisis. They ran out of bones. So then these places were basically stockpiling as many bones as they could. This is definitely the height of the bone crisis. And they must have photographed it to commemorate that. But it's like a photo that is used in history books to show what dumb bullshit we did in the name of Manifest Destiny. But it happened in Detroit. Like, it's just so strange, right? So I found out that the company still exists. 150 years later, they're still making pigment from burning animal bones. And I went to them, and I decided to do an installation where I would make an installation with Detroit's bones. And I decided the bones were abandoned boat holes. So I went around Detroit and I dragged around 33 abandoned boats to this factory. I started doing drawings on what I was going to do, how I was going to make it. These are like proposal drawings. Similar to the Bible ball, I was going to make the boat ball. And then this is what happened. So I painted the boats with the bone black. You can see it kind of slathered on. And I suspended them, kind of thinking about the idea of we're underwater. So the ropes are anchors coming down. But it's also kind of a procession, like a funerary procession that's moving the same direction as the river of Detroit, because the river is right next door. And at the end, there's a kind of talismanic boat mound there. These boats are worshiping. But at the end, I cut all their bow lines, so they all hung nose down. I drove around to kick up dirt for those photos. And I crushed them all, put them in a big pile, boat mound, and put them in a dumpster, many dumpsters, and disposed of them. So a lot of these projects, in a way, are just me cleaning up garbage. These actually did go to a landfill, because fiberglass, they have not figured out how to recycle fiberglass yet. Crystal Bridges wanted me to do something similar, and I was like, that doesn't make sense. Why would I bring boats down to the Crystal Bridges Museum in Arkansas? It has nothing to do with like the history of Detroit, the history of that place. So I proposed different ideas to see if they'd go with those. I was like, why don't we make the bone mound right in the middle of the museum? And here's what we'll do. We'll use all the plastic waste from Walmart, because Crystal Bridges is owned by Walmart. And they were like, no, we don't want you to do that. So then I was like, well, what if I made a cemetery where the tombstones are all the places Walmart put out of business? And they were like, we don't want you to do that. So my last proposal was to make this bone black installation with windmills, kind of, again, touching on farmland and the fertilizer and the way the bones were shipped up to Detroit to be turned into bone black, then shipped back down to be turned into fertilizer and used. So I proposed this kind of anthropomorphized windmill, and then I made it. So a 40-foot windmill, I turned it into like a drunken farmer who was depressed and sitting there all alone. I gave him some boat wings, and I installed it a few different times. That's in Arizona. Another thing that happened during COVID is I was already kayaking for reasons, but I got really into it, and it just led to this whole series of documenting while kayaking, and I made a video of kayaking through the quarantines, which is like a 20-minute video documenting it. And it's also a photo series, so I'm taking photos, I'm filming, but it's like my way, another way of taking something that I want to do because I like it and turning it into an art project. Like, if I like kayaking, why not make it an art project? This is driftwood taken out of the Tittabawassee River after the Edenville Dam collapse. So a friend of mine has a place right on the Edenville Dam, Tittabawassee area. His house was one of the first affected when the dam failed. And we spent a lot of time in COVID up there helping him. But I just got really, really interested in trying to get some of this wood that had been under the water for 100 years. And I'm still interested in doing that. This was an installation at the Saginaw Museum, the Marshall Fredericks Museum in Saginaw. I got commissioned to make a piece on the Detroit riverfront out of buoys, Coast Guard buoys. I decided it would be like Nike a sandal race, the winged goddess of victory. And then I got commissioned to make a sculpture in front of what used to be Cobo Hall in Detroit. So I made an 11-foot version of my sewer ball. It's called Floating Citadel. I call it my Cobo ball. It's bronze. I had it cast at a foundry in Arizona. But it's interesting to me because they commissioned me to make a piece that connected to history, and it does connect to history, but in a way that I'm not sure that they care. But I care, which is that one of the first creeks in Detroit that went along through the center of the city and then emptied into the Detroit River, which was like probably a bucolic creek when the French got here, that by 100 years of white people living in Detroit, it had become so nasty that it became the city's first sewer. They had to enclose it because it was so shit-filled. And so this is a monument to how we've turned the earth into a sewer. And it's also, you know, an artwork, it's pretty and all that stuff. So this is the last show I had. It was a solo show at David Klein, and you can see there's more sewer grates. And it was a lot of like reflection on things I've done over my career. So the last 25 years, sculptures I made in the 90s, things that you saw early on in the photos. That's a self-portrait that I made when I was in school. I was your age. I put a spike through my head. That's how, that was a good time I was going through. And then I had a mid-career retrospective at Cranbrook Art Museum. So a lot of the things you saw in the slideshow were all installed for one exhibition. That was November through March. It was a pretty amazing thing. You can see my kayak video. You know, it was like really strange to see your whole life kind of displayed in front of you. Photo series, Detroit at Night, fiberglass animals, the drowning polar bear up there. And then here's the relics installation again, another version of a plinth of all the stalagmites I gathered from all the buildings over the years. Then to the World Bookshelf. The world still hasn't ended. So I'll wrap it up with this. The obscure object of worship in this installation is this snake. This sneaky snake. He's over there in that room. I'm currently working on trying to get these cast concrete playground sculptures from the mid-60s. These particular ones were made by Jim Miller Melberg. If you ever see a concrete turtle or a porpoise or something that looks like Swiss cheese and it looks abandoned and looks like someone like me could come with a giant machine and take it, you let me know. If you see one of those, really let me know. These are super rare. Those are called moon houses. I've got about 12 of these kinds of things, but I'm just trying to collect them and reuse them somehow. I've also been trying to get these stumps out of the kind of the remnants of what was uncovered when the Eatonville Dam failed, when the Secord Dam failed, when Smallwood Dam failed. You know, when everything kind of ended up in Sanford. These giant cedar stumps, I want to use them. I want to somehow acquire some. This is a commission I have that I'm currently making the city of Detroit. I was given 120 cast iron spiral staircase steps. So if you need to make a spiral staircase, you can also call me. And then I'm commissioned to make a piece in Bosnia. So this is a city in Bosnia called Bihać. There's a lot of monuments throughout Bosnia and former Yugoslavia. They're called spomeniks, which just translates to monuments. These are made out of stone, but like I think they're super powerful and mystical. And I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I want to make something like that. And then the last thing is that on Monday, I go here. This is near Kalamazoo. It's called Prairie Round. It's an artist residency where you get to use this building. It's a 400,000 square foot old paper mill. And I'm going to be there for a month trying to figure out what the fuck I'm going to do. And I'm starting Monday, so it's about to happen. And that's it. I know I went long. I went over time, I'm pretty sure. But
You're good.
oh, I'm getting some nods. Why weren't you flagging me down or telling?
If you need to leave, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, Scott is here to answer some questions for those of you.
Now I'm going
who
to
have
do like stuff
questions.
like this. I'll just walk. Does anybody have any questions? Don't be shy. Yes.
Yeah, a friend of mine, you know, she's part of Lakota, and she wondered why there's several in the crowd people, feathers, and
Yeah. Well, I'm like a young bird watcher. I love birds, but I also I believe in signs. I don't know, like I feel like I get signs from the natural world, and I feel like to me there's a lot of natural things that I find mysticism in. So playing with that idea, with that installation, they're holding feathers, they're holding cicadas, they have sculptures in their hands, sometimes they have tools. A few of them, one of them has like forge tools. So to me, it's again playing with this idea that to those people, whoever they are, this fictional people, which I'm considering a future ancient people, like a future ancient, if that makes any sense. That's how far I'm thinking. That to them, these objects are talismanic. It's not really about what I think. I do collect feathers. Denise knows that. Denise collects feathers. We all collect feathers. But I collect bones. I mean, I collect things. I'm a collector.
So
if you couldn't tell.
Were they found feathers?
Everything. Yeah.
There's a story about that. And the end of the story is when you find a feather, it's to remind you to play. So
Okay.
play with it.
I'm doing it. Yeah, awesome. Who else? Yes?
What is the largest object you've ever had to transport somewhere?
Oh, shit. Let's see. I mean, those pipes are crazy. So the machines I would use for those pipes, the same machine I used when I did the barn, it's something called a telehandler, a telescopic handler, like material handler. So basically imagine a forklift with tires this big that can lift 12,000 pounds, and the forks can extend about 40 feet. So every time, like when I decided to stack those towers 3 tall, so there would be like an 11,000 pound tube, and then I'd have to stack one on top, and I'd stack another. I'm maxing out the machine. It could tip, it could fall on me. It was really dumb. But I don't know, like I just felt like confident, and nothing ever happened. But that was the heaviest for sure. I don't know if largest, but I mean the boats, some of those boats, like I got boats that had been in the same place for so long that there were trees growing in them. And even to get them on a trailer, it was like too heavy. And then they'd be hanging off the trailer. I'd be driving through Detroit with a boat that was too big for the trailer with trees in it. Like that might have been the craziest, where people were like, what the hell? Which of course I enjoyed. I don't know. Yeah, that's a pretty good question. I'm really racking my brain. It might be the giant boats with trees coming out of them. But if you have any ideas, I'm open to it. If you want me to move something really big.
I can't think of any right now, but I will say that boat with the tree was exactly what sparked that.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, it was crazy. But you just reminded me, I did apply. So there's a sunken submarine in Coney Island Canal, like river or whatever, in Coney Island, New York. A guy made a yellow submarine in the 60s, kind of had this big fanfare about it. It was called Quasar 1 or some shit like that. He got in, it was going to be launched, and it sunk. And it's been sitting there for, I don't know, like that many decades with just the top of it sticking out. And I was like, I need to get that out of there. I need to like get that quasar out of there and do something with it. So maybe that'll be the biggest one. Who else? Wait, I'm going to go back.
So it seemed like a lot of your early work, particularly, and I guess not too, but a lot of it was just born out of general curiosity, curiosity about the history of this place or going into that place. How do you feel like, do you still feel like you have that level of curiosity as you've aged, you got more successful?
Yeah.
I feel like it's died down a little bit.
Yeah, no, this is going to sound super pretentious, but you made me think of it, so I'm going to say it. There's at the beginning of a Taoist book called The Secret of the Golden Flower, there's an introduction written by Carl Jung, and in their introduction, he says something in Latin that I'm pretty sure is rerum novarum cupidus, and that translates to that he was saying, I always want to remain unbiased and curious. And that stuck with me, like remain unbiased and curious. Like it's a lot of work to remain unbiased, number one, as you get older, but it's also work to like constantly be interested about new things. But to me, that's like the best thing in life is having excitement about new things. Like I went to Bosnia. It was so cool. Like I have to figure out what I'm going to do in Bosnia. It's scary, but if somebody brought me to a different country every year for the rest of my life, I would be thrilled. I'd be like, send me here, I'll figure out a project in Antarctica. You know, like I really have this, to me that would be the best life, is to keep discovering things and getting ideas. So I don't think my curiosity has ever waned. And I also feel like the people who found their thing and they just keep doing it over and over till they die, like I always hated that stuff. I was like, that seems real boring. I want to do new things, like challenge myself. And then I'll say, even though Denise read all that stuff off, like, I'm not super successful. Like, I'm still getting by. Like, good things happen to me, but I'm still in the window of like, I don't fucking know what might happen 2 years from now. So the unknown aspect of being an artist is something you have to be okay with. And I've basically cleverly decided that my whole art practice would be to be in the unknown. So it kind of levels altogether. You had a question?
Yeah, I took a look at your resume and saw that your highest degree is a BFA.
BFA, yeah.
And I was just curious if you could talk a little bit about whether there was a choice there. 'Cause
Sure.
lots of times when we see people making the kind of work you do, they've gone off to do a
Yeah.
program, this and that and the other. Could you talk about a little bit about your personal trajectory?
Yeah. Money would be the first answer to that. Like, I'm going to tell a really personal thing, which is that when I graduated in the year 2000, I had $40,000 worth of debt. I couldn't afford going to school. I certainly couldn't afford going to a private art school like CCS in Detroit. So I did it all through loans. I also worked all the time. And over the last 30 years, that went up to 70 grand in debt. And while I was installing this show, I got an email that it was canceled. Just gone. Absolved by the Biden-Harris program. Like, it's the craziest feeling, like an anchor has been detached from me. So that's amazing, but the answer is I never went to graduate school because money. By the time I graduated with my BFA, I was already like, well, I also didn't like school very much. I was like ready to be done, you know? Like we were talking earlier about like finishing things. Finishing my degree at the art school was the first time I ever finished something. I was like, I'm just doing it to finish it so I can say I did it and I didn't like stop halfway through. But by the time I was done, I was like, I don't want to go back to fucking school. And I also was okay, like I was getting gigs, I was kind of exhibiting. So all those things combined, the money was a big part of it. But what I say now is if you can figure out a way to do it, I should have done it. I do think for the reason that, not that I think I would have become a better artist, but I do think you make connections through graduate school. A lot of times you travel to another place and you make, like if I would have went to school on the East Coast or West Coast, I could have made connections in a way that I don't have. And I think that that's kind of a benefit that you can get from grad school. It's a lot of money to get that benefit, and there's zero guarantee that you're going to have a career after grad school. I know people who went to Yale and they did not get success, right? So it's a crapshoot. But yeah, I don't know. And I know that you can teach better if you get your graduate degree. You can get like a professorship probably better, but I don't know. I think it's...
Do you think your artwork would have changed?
Hell yeah. I mean, I'm sure it would have changed. But I do think that like, the things that they put you through in graduate school, where they break you down so that you're like, you have to kind of build yourself back up. I don't know. I kind of feel like I went through that in my real life because I did not even go to art school until I was 22. Like I went through a lot of hardships. I feel like that might have been enough. Like I'd been broken down. I was like already built back up from the breaking down part. So I'm not sure I needed that kind of like concocted way that grad school creates. But who knows? Like we were talking about, there's still time, right?
Right, always.
Well, there's still time. Maybe I'll do it next year. Wait till I turn 50. Who else? Well, wait. He raised his hand slightly before you.
So like, when you go over to these abandoned places, do you take them with you, or do you only go in alone until you find material?
Well, there are times when I've been with other people, but almost, I would say 99% of the time I'm alone. I like to be alone. I like to work alone. talk about it like as akin to a painter in the studio. Do painters bring people with them when they're in the studio? No, like to me, it's a very meditative practice. I like to be in these places alone the same way I like to go for a hike in the woods alone. So, but there have been times where I've needed help with something.
Right, like gathering materials, like how you said earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting older and I don't really want to do dumb stuff like this anymore, but for the majority of my life, I've done things like really overwork myself because I insisted on doing it alone. Like the barn projects, Denise knows all these stories, but like the barn projects, I worked so much like this that I pinched a nerve in my neck and my arms went numb. And they were so numb that I couldn't fall asleep without sitting up in a chair. And I had to stop working. Like I tried to work through that. Just dumb things where I beat myself up. The pyramid, I worked in that abandoned building alone, and my back spasmed. I threw my back out. And I was like trapped in this abandoned building, laying on the ice for hours. And I didn't want to call anyone and be like, help me get out of this abandoned building, right? But maybe laying on the ice helped, because eventually I could get up. And then I was like bedridden after that for a couple of weeks because my back was so hurt. So there are things I should ask for help for, and I'm kind of dumb about it. But I do like the aspect of being alone in nature and kind of in your own meditative state while working. Okay.
So I noticed that you wanted to make like balls out of 2 previous projects. So I think my question is, why is it significant to you, like the ball? Also,
Yeah.
would you be willing to start a project for the sole purpose of like making it into a ball? Because I feel like that's something, you know, like it's like something subconscious that you would want to do. Yeah.
So did everybody hear that? She's asking about those spheres that I keep making. I think just, it started to become really, like I was saying earlier, like self-portraits to me. I felt like I was using it in different situations as like, me in this place, and kind of making it like, I feel like there's painters who put some little Easter egg that's their thing in every painting. Like we were at the museum the other day and they were talking about that artist who puts the red dot in every painting. And I think it's become kind of like that for me. So when the call for entries came around in the city of Detroit for a sculpture downtown, I honestly didn't think about that piece. But then I started doing research about that sewer, and then I was like a light bulb moment. I thought like, oh, this might be a perfect time to use this. Because they're also talking about it being a global hub, and I'm like, this is kind of a globe. It kind of fit together, but it wasn't planned. I didn't have that set out from the beginning that I was going to do that. But yeah, and I make them in different shapes and sizes, and sometimes they're really hand-built, and other times they're very perfect, and I made oblong ones and whatever. It's a motif, I think, that I'm playing with, and it really, to me, still, since the first time I thought about it, it still feels like it resonates to me, this idea of this threshold between realities. You know, like mythologically, like, you know, the above and the below. Like Anselm Kiefer will make these really crazy giant paintings, these collage type paintings, and they'll be called Himmel Erde, which means heaven, earth. And it'll just be like these things, and I love that. I love playing with these kinds of big archetypal forms and ideas. Yeah, you're filming me while I'm answering.
All right, time for one last question, and then we're going to take other questions down in the baby room.
Ask them at the same time.
Okay.
Both of you, yeah. Last 2 questions.
I know you said to stay curious, but have you yourself ever experienced like artist blocks?
Sure. Yeah, like writer's block type thing. Yeah, of course. I mean, like I was saying, whenever I take on a project where I'm basically saying, like I've become known for, we can bring him anywhere and he'll figure it out. Well, that's a lot of fucking pressure. Like, what if I figure it out, but what I make sucks? Because I made a bad work this time, you know? Like, not every time am I happy with it. So, like the one I'm going to do in Bosnia, or the thing I'm going to do at this residency, yeah, I get worried. I kind of just work through the worry. And then I would say, sometimes I use other things to, like if I know there's this thing and I'm stuck, then I'll work on something else. I was saying this earlier to one of the studio visits, like sometimes I'll veg out and I'll know that I need an escape. whether that's like a terrible movie or a vacation or just a drive down a road on the freeway, like sometimes I'll just know that I need an escape. I can't keep pounding my head because it doesn't usually work like that. But I did learn that years ago I had a really negative internal dialogue, like a repeating internal dialogue that was more worry-based, like things where you don't believe in yourself and you just kind of have this ongoing, you're gonna fuck it up type thing. And I was able to, at some point, just change that to, you're gonna figure it out. You can do it, you're gonna figure it out. Like nothing crazy, but like somehow this belief that like, you're gonna figure it out. So even when I get stuck, I just calmly, like, all right, I'll figure it out. And so far, I have, but like I said, when you do a slideshow, you don't show your worst work. And some of it, I still consider not my best, but like, there's some stuff that I'm like, oh, God damn it. So yeah, you work through it, you put it aside. Some stuff you don't do for 20 years. You're stuck, okay, do it another decade, I don't know. Okay.
I wanted to relate to
You want to do what?
I wanted to relate to her question because the spheres, if they're everywhere and they're all installations, is it like tagging like graffiti for you?
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting question. And I would say like one of the things I like is that I'm not a graffiti artist, but I was like making sculptures the same way graffiti artists were. I was going in abandoned buildings and making these things and leaving them behind. And I do think there was a kind of kinship between me and graffiti artists. They respected my work. And if they didn't, the person who didn't would get yelled at by the other graffiti artists. Like the egg was destroyed or tagged and I got sent this whole thing, somebody at some point sent it to me where like other guys were yelling at him. And I thought that was fascinating too, that I kind of gained the respect of guys who do tag and write because I'm a sculptor, but I'm kind of doing the same thing. So yeah, I like that way of working. I'm just not a painter. So I do think there's an element of that for sure. Every now and then I leave things around that nobody knows about, and if they find them, then they'll be like, did you leave that? I kind of like that sense of discovery too.
Okay, if we have, yes, no, maybe.
Yeah, whatever you want, you're the boss.
Right. Last question, and then we're
Okay.
going to move down. Yeah.
Well, my friend and I, it was the evening before the actual opening.
Yeah.
We spent quite a long time independently, and then we sat down together and kind of mused about what's going on here. And
Perfect.
at some point I said, well, I'm wondering about this. There's like a multitude of mushrooms. I said, the only thing this is missing is a caterpillar with a hookah bite.
Yeah.
And we sat there and just laughed for
Yeah.
about 5 minutes.
I mean, Alice in Wonderland is another great thing where it's like, the idea of going down the rabbit hole, going through the sewer grate down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're right on the money.
And left-handed people are in their right mind.
We're the best.
Okay. Let's take any more questions down to the Baby Room Gallery where you can ask Scott in person. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks.